And welcome to the Beef Health Check webinar brought to you by Animal Health Ireland and Teagasc. The focus of this evening's webinar is on calf health and calf genetics and how, when combined, these two factors can lead to a road of improved sustainability for dairy beef producers. Over the next hour or so, we'll be joined by a range of panel speakers in key areas that will help optimize our dairy beef systems in terms of health and animal genetics. This webinar is very timely because over the next 2 to 3 months, approximately 350 to 400,000 calves will be traded from dairy farms where they're born onto specialist calf to beef rearers. These calves are going to be artificially reared, so they're hugely dependent on the skills and the level of animal husbandry that is implemented at farm level. Typically, in excess of 10,000 farmers purchase and rear calves artificially on an annual basis in Ireland. And we're now at a point where over 60% of Irish beef cattle processed in meat plants are of direct dairy origin. There's huge potential in terms of dairy beef production in Ireland, but if we're to fully realise this potential, we have to optimise the health and the genetic potential of the animals that we enrol in these systems. So that really is the focus of this evening's webinar. And I suppose as the evening goes on, there'll be an opportunity for you to submit your questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll relay those back to the panel at the very end to generate some discussion amongst them. So firstly tonight, the first of our speakers is Peter O Hanrahan. Peter implements a dairy beef system just outside Thomastown in County Kilkenny in partnership with his father, Thomas. And we caught up with Peter down on his farm where he outlines his dairy beef system. And we're going to play that now in the next video.
Farm here consists of 91 hectares of grassland. We run a calf to beef system along with my father. We buy in the calves from anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks of age. They're brought through to slaughter anywhere between 22 and 28 months of age. I'm buying all the calves locally from 4 to 5 different farmers. I'm going back to the same farmers each year. I know the farmers, I know they've got their colostrum, I know the herd status, I know the calves are well looked after and they're healthy when I'm getting them. Calves arrive here, they're given access to a fresh deep bed of clean straw. They're given access to clean, fresh water, calf crunch. They're registered then with EID tags through the calf feeder. Calves arrive on farm, they're left for 24 hours to acclimatise and get used to their surroundings. We then dose for coccidiosis and we vaccinate against bacterial and viral pneumonia. The calf shed here is it's a 4-bay shed. It's 20 foot wide, 10 foot passage, 20 foot wide. It's concrete walls, sides and back. It's all open to the front of the shed, sliding doors either side, access roller door for the centre passage. We went with the sliding doors for the ease of cleaning out the shed. We slide one door across onto the other side. We let the calves into the middle passage, clean it out, let the calves back in, and slide the other door across on this door and do the exact same on the other side. It makes it really easy to clean out, and you clean it out a lot more often than it is easy. Next then we have the Yorkshire boarding is along both sides of the shed. It's leaving one span open on either side of fresh air coming through. That's what it equates to. There's plenty of light in the shed. We've clear lights along the roof on both sides. We've plenty of lights. We have canopies in the middle and the top for letting out any of the stale air. We have a slope of 1 and 20 in the floor for drainage, 2 channels either side, and they both slope to the front and into a tank. We also have the canopies. I made up the canopies. It just creates a little micro environment for the calves. It stops any downdraft coming down along the wall to the calves. And when you come in the mornings, you would see the calves lying under the canopies. They're very easy they're light, they're very easy to pull up and down for cleaning out the shed.
So we're going to be joined now by Peter O Hanrahan, and I should have mentioned Peter is also a participant in the Teagasc Greenacres Dairy Calf to Beef Programme, and he works very closely with his advisor on that programme, Sean Cummins. And really, you know, we must commend Peter on the calf shed that we've seen in that video. You know, it's very much designed with calves in mind. It's not designed for a dual purpose shed or for some other use. It's the purpose-built calf shed, which is a really, really important factor, and that, I really would commend Peter on it. So thanks for joining us this evening, Peter. And I suppose just taking off from there about the calf shed, what difference is that calf shed, with calves in mind? That's the way you designed it. What difference has that made to your overall farm business?
Yeah, it's been a great advantage to us with getting into bigger numbers of calves. It's for animal health. It's improved the health of the animals compared to the sheds we had. Mortality. It's all down to labor saving as well. It's much easier to spot a sick calf, do anything with a calf. Better lighting in it, easier to clean, easier to disinfect. It's just all around helps with the health of the calf going forward.
Absolutely. And I suppose you just mentioned labor, and we saw on the video there that you have an automatic feeding system in place on the farm. Just, I suppose, one of the things, labor is limited on farms. Everyone's trying to, either go automatic feeding or once a day in some cases. But sometimes it can be a missed opportunity to inspect calves for health. So in that automatic feeding system, how do you monitor calves' health? What are you looking out for when you do your walkthroughs, or how many times do you do it?
I go to the computer on the feeder 2 to 3 times a day, probably 3 times a day. First thing in the morning, check the computer. I check the drinking speeds, the consumption, the percentage, and how many times they break off the feeder. If a calf is down in all 3, the calf is generally going to be sick. Most of the time I check the drinking speed. If the drinking speed is up, the calf is fairly good. I'd have a walk around the pen. The first thing I do is go to the computer, and it always tells you it's very good at picking up anything wrong with the calf.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, and I suppose one of the main really important things in your system is that you've identified suitable farms. You've minimizing the number of sources, and that's probably a huge advantage for those farms in themselves. But how does it reduce your risk of disease, or what are the advantages there for you?
Yeah, I'm kind of going back to the same 5 or 6 farmers each year. A good relationship with the farmers. Can have a look at the cows, talk to the farmers before I buy the calves. Gives me a chance. Maybe one farmer we're giving the vaccination before they come. Stuff like that. I know what the type of calf is. I know that it's well looked after. I know he's definitely got his colostrum. It's just a big advantage. The calf is only traveling maybe 10-15 minutes at the most to the farms. Less stress on the calf. They can batch them in the numbers I want to suit the vaccinations. It's just a big advantage for both, I suppose, the farmer selling the calf and myself to have a good relationship in place.
Absolutely. And I suppose when you talk about, we see the shed that you have a really nice environment for those calves. You're minimizing your risk because you have few sources. A lot of farmers that might have all those positives going for them may start looking at cutting costs and seeing is there anything they can shave off their outlay. And vaccination may be one thing that farmers may opt not to do or may cut back on. Why wouldn't that be an option for you? Or, what is the value you see in the vaccination protocol you have?
I definitely wouldn't change or cut back on my vaccination program, because since we started vaccinating, we've had very little issues with calves. It's a lot easier to try and prevent something than to try and fix it afterwards, and to try and be giving shots to calves and lactates and stuff afterwards takes time. They're losing average daily gain, like sick calf, over the next 2 years, and which is vital in a calf to beef system. It's just the calf that gets the setback is you can always see it at the back end. So the vaccination is I definitely wouldn't be cutting back on my program.
Absolutely. And just what would be the typical disease challenges or health issues that you would see, in your calf to beef system?
I suppose Pastorella could have been an issue for me. We would have been, when we started vaccinating for Pastorella, we haven't had any issues since. We do coccidiosis at the start. I'm just from buying from a few different herds, I'd always give them a dose coming into the shed, and then I know I'm hopefully in the clear. I'd always go to one new farmer every year to try and I suppose try out a few new farms. So I'd always give the doses coming in first into the shed when they come off the trailer, just the coccidiosis one.
Okay. And just I suppose you're talking about, buying calves on farm. It seems there from the video that you've a lot of, Holstein Friesian bull calves, so full dairy male animals that you're purchasing in on the farm. Why that breed type?
I suppose for the availability at that time of the year, I can put 100 to 120 calves on the feeder, but I go again a second round. So it's to try and get my feeder and my shed full first time round as quick as possible to capacity. So most of the farmers I'm buying off of all Friesian at the start, and that's mostly it's mostly the availability at the time. That's the calf that's on offer.
Okay. And going forward, what would need to change for you to go out and actively select beef calves? What would what would make that a more attractive to your business?
I suppose availability is one thing. Price, I suppose you're paying a lot more for the beef calf, and it's hard to tell what that calf is going to be like. So I suppose hopefully get into checking the merits of these calves, and mostly trying to find more farmers with these good calves locally that I can source.
Absolutely, yeah. And look, I suppose hopefully over time, with increased usage of sex semen, more beef being used from earlier on the breeding season, it's a real possibility that there will be increased availability of high merit beef calves, from that very start, because there clearly is a distinct advantage in terms of probably their health status and their ability to utilize grass over the first grazing season, and we probably see that, on a lot of farms. It's very interesting, the coccidiosis dose, I suppose, a preventative dose that you're given, at such an early stage in the animal's life, rather than going out to pasture and getting a challenge. You're opting to go in very early with that. How do you find that serving you?
Yeah, I suppose I got coccidiosis in the shed a couple of years ago, and it's just to try and just minimize the spreading. I just give it to him now to make sure I don't have any issues. It's just labor saving as well at the end when I'm not going to be on farm the whole time. So I'd rather prevent something than have to deal with it after.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think that sums up a lot of the challenges that we face on the health front on calf to beef systems. So I suppose just to wrap up with Peter, and we'll be back to Peter, and just a reminder, if any of you have any questions for Peter or of any of our panelists, to submit them in the Q&A function. We'll compile those and we'll be putting them back to the panel at the very end. And just one question that's popped in there for yourself, Peter. Do you ever have to go in with a secondary dose for coccidiosis, although you've given a preventative? Do you have to follow up with a second one?
Yeah, we're given a second dose after 2 weeks. After 2 weeks at grass, they're getting a second dose. We've been advised, obviously, by the vets that leave them out of grass for 2 weeks and give them another dose then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect. So we'll be joined again by Peter towards the end of the panel. And now I suppose we're moving on to calf selection and using some of the genetic tools that are available to us. And on this, we've Chris Daly, who works with ICBF. So Chris works on Herd Plus services, and Chris has also been heavily involved in the rolling out and implementation of the various BDGP and knowledge transfer programs that ICBF and DAFM are involved in. So Chris, and most importantly about Chris, he's a beef farmer himself. So he comes from a beef farm in West Cork. So he really does have that interaction of, using genetic tools and putting them into practice on his own farm, and he'll discuss how these can be used across all of our beef systems in his presentation. So thanks, Chris, and welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nicky. Good afternoon, everyone. I think before I start my presentation, I think there's a video going to be played. So that was a nice lead in there to the slides that I'm going to present. So what you saw there were 4 animals that were actually videoed in Tully, and those animals were actually slaughtered in the last 2 weeks. Now I have their data in a slide later on, so we can go through it in a bit more detail. But I suppose what it does highlight is that, you know, all of those animals were out of dairy dams, albeit dams of different types and albeit of different sires and sire breeds, but they're all dairy beef animals, but they had quite, there was big differences there in both their genetic merit in terms of the CBV, but also in terms of the, you know, the final performance from their, you know, their carcass weight, carcass conformation and carcass fat. And obviously that would have seen big differences then in the revenue generated by those animals when slaughtered. But look, as I said, I have a table with their data in a slide later on, so I can we can go through it in a bit more detail. And we can all see that there. So the commercial beef value, so it's a tool that both ICBF and Teagasc have been working on for the last 12 months, you know, to help farmers to pick more profitable beef animals, you know, your dairy calves, dairy beef calves, but also for suckler farmers or farmers buying, you know, your suckler weanlings or stores. It's a tool for them to select more profitable animals as well, or higher genetic merit animals. So this is a breakdown of the herds and going by farming system across the country, livestock herds. I suppose what I'll draw your attention to is this cohort of herds here. There's about 23,000 herds. They're livestock farms, but they're not breeding any animals. So they don't have dairy cows or they don't have suckler cows. There's no animals being born on the farm. So they're purchasing in all of the animals and either taking them from maybe calves to stores or taking them from the purchase point right through to slaughter. And that's a significant cohort of herds. And I would definitely say, like from an ICBF point of view, you know, our Herd Plus service has really been geared towards your breeding herds, you know, your dairy farmers and suckler farmers. And, you know, our service hasn't really been, there hasn't been a whole lot there to offer to these, I suppose what you'd call dry stock or non-breeding beef herds. So the CBV is an exciting and an interesting development for those farmers. So I suppose this really encapsulates, you know, what farmers, dairy beef farmers like Peter in the video earlier, what they're presented with every spring when they're going to buy calves. Like in Peter's case, he's buying them directly from a farm, but there's a huge number of calves are sourced through marts as well. And, you know, here we have a pin of dairy beef calves, you know, and by looking at those animals at 3 to 4 weeks of age, what can we ascertain from them? Well, look, we can see that they're all pretty healthy. So we can say with confidence that they've come from a farm where they've been well fed, well looked after. You know, there's a good shine from them. They seem to be thriving pretty well. And we have a fair idea of breed type as well. So we know that these are more than likely out of a Hereford sire and a Frisian cow. These are maybe Angus's or Limousines. But apart from, you know, how well the animal is thriving and the breed type, we can't really tell a whole lot other than that. I mean, we have 4 Hereford calves here in the pen. They all look pretty much the same at 3 to 4 weeks old, but the genetic merit of those calves could be very, very different. And that's something that farmers really need to know. So I suppose these two little speech bubbles here really sum up the issue. So this calf here is saying I have 0% Jersey and my daddy is a high carcass merit Hereford bull. So this calf probably has a very good carcass merit and has good potential and would be a calf that any potential buyer could maybe spend a few extra euros on trying to purchase. Whereas this calf is saying I'm 25% Jersey, so its mother is the dam is a crossbred cow, the grandsire is a Jersey bull. But it's a double whammy here in a sense, because the sire is also a very low carcass merit beef bull. So in this case, it's an Aberdeen Angus. So there could be a huge difference between those calves in terms of their genetic merit. But at the point of sale, they're 3 to 4 weeks old. It's very, very difficult to ascertain those differences. So it was accepted by, you know, Teagasc and ICBF that this cohort of farmers, and as you saw from the last slide, it's a large cohort, over 23,000. They needed some sort of a tool to help them to get an insight into the genetic merit of these animals and help them to make more informed purchasing decisions. So we said, well, what if we could give them something as simple as just a basic euro value and a star rating as well, just to tell them where the animals rank. Okay, and when you apply the CBV with a star rating on it, then you can see that there's a very, very significant difference in the genetic potential of these two calves. You know, without that information, you know, both of these calves could have been purchased for pretty similar amounts of money, but this could really differentiate between, you know, your high quality dairy beef calves and your poor quality ones. So what exactly is the commercial beef value? So a lot of you will have heard of the terminal index, which would be applicable to suckler farmers. So it's the index in the Eurostar system that deals completely with your terminal traits, you know, so animals that are destined for slaughter. But of course, the farmers that are buying calves, just like Peter, they're not concerned with the calving traits because they're not calving the cows. So things like gestation and calving difficulty, you know, they're not of economic importance to Peter's system. He's really worried about the traits that are of economic importance to him from the point of purchase up until the point of slaughter. So there's 5 of those traits. You have feed intake. Obviously, we like to identify animals that will eat less and, you know, give us equal or more performance with less feed. We want docility, so that's important both from a health and safety point of view, but also from labor. You know, we don't want to be spending time chasing animals to try and get them in for a TB test or to dose them or to vaccinate them. And a lot of beef farmers nowadays are part-time, so time can be at a premium. And the 3 carcass traits as well. So you've your carcass weight, your carcass conformation, and your carcass fat. So how will it be displayed? So this is an example of the commercial beef value profile that's available to all Herd Plus herds at the moment. So you have the animal's breed type, so dairy beef, dairy. So dairy beef is essentially your dairy dam and beef sire, and then dairy is where both parents are dairy. So it just differentiates between them. You have your euro value, so that's the actual commercial beef value in euros. You have a crossbreed star rating, but this is quite an interesting one now. We have a new star rating for the CBV, which is called within breed type. So there's 3 breed types here. So you have your dairy beef, which is your, you know, your calf that's out of a Hereford sire and a Frisian dam, or an Angus sire and Frisian dam. Then you have your dairy, which is where both parents are dairy. So your full-on Holstein Frisian bull calf. And what's not in this screenshot, but what will be applicable to a lot of herds, is there's a suckler breed type as well. And what's important there is the within breed type stars. If we only had a crossbreed star rating, well, you know, all the dairy animals would probably be coming into 1 stars, and all your suckler animals would be 4 and 5s. But, you know, just like we saw there in the video with Peter, a lot of farmers are tied into a particular system and a particular enterprise where they're interested in a certain type of calf. So it's the within breed type will be important. So take, for example, in Peter's system where maybe he's focusing on Holstein Friesian calves. Well, he has the within breed type, and he can see, for example, this animal here is a dairy cross dairy animal. So it's probably a black and white Friesian male. And within that breed cohort, it's 5 stars. So, you know, if Peter was buying this animal, he could see, well, this calf is ranking in the top 20% within the breed type that's of interest to my system. And then you have the values for the carcass, or the 5 traits that are in the CBV as well. So you have your carcass weight, carcass conformation, carcass fat, feed intake, and docility. It's color coded as well. So wherever you see a value in red, it means that it's the wrong side of 0. So as you can see, there's some of these animals here that have negative carcass weights. It's in red. All of them are actually negative in conformation. Feed intake is then the opposite way. You actually want a negative figure on feed intake. So there's actually only one animal there with a negative figure. The rest are positive. And any of the figures in black then are obviously, you know, they're at the right side of 0. What animals will be eligible to receive it? So all your commercial suckler males and females up until they've had a calf. So once any female calves down, they no longer get the CBV. All your dairy males and dairy beef males and females up until they've had a calf, because some dairy beef females end up in the suckler herd. You know, they're purchased in as maybe calves or stored, put in calf. So females, you know, once they do have a calf, the decision has been made to use them then as breeding animals, and the CBV is not a breeding index, it's purely a slaughter value essentially. And the following will not have a CBV. So pedigree beef males and females, because as I said, they're breeding animals and this isn't a breeding index. So pedigree males and females won't get it. Dairy females, so dairy cows and dairy replacement heifers, they won't have a CBV because they're for milk production. And any females that have had a calf, so these suckler females, if any of them calves down, the CBV will no longer be on them. Or any of the dairy beef heifer calves, if they calve down into the suckler herd, they'll no longer have the CBV either. So where will it be visible? So I went through the online profile 2 slides back with you. So it's any herd that's currently signed up to Herd Plus, you can log in now as we speak, and you can actually access the commercial beef value on your Herd Plus login. The plan is to roll it out to mart boards. We're hoping to get it out this spring. No, it won't be on all marts initially, but we're working with some marts at the moment to get the CBV onto the boards. I suppose the positive thing is that the infrastructure and a lot of the background, you know, IT work and infrastructure is already there, because as a lot of you will be aware, you know, we've been showing the EBI values for dairy animals and the Eurostar indexes for beef animals with the last probably 4 or 5 years. So it's good that a lot of that work has already been done. I mean, in this example here, you can see it's index values for a suckler animal, a replacement index within breed, a crossbreed, genomic eval. So it would simply be a case of, you know, instead of replacement index, you'd be showing a commercial beef value there, along with maybe a crossbreed and within breed type stars as well. And look, we'll be looking to develop a report for herds and Herd Plus as well, so that we could post out similar to calving reports and weaning performance reports, etc., that would be sent out in the form of a, you know, printed off PDF. So I suppose, like for a lot of farmers out there, you know, having a new tool or a new value or index is all fine, but, you know, is it actually working, and will it actually predict the more profitable animals for them at the point of purchase? So we did some analysis on quite a large cohort or population of animals that were slaughtered back in November 2021. So we looked at 40,000 steers slaughtered in November 21, and this was right across the board. So your suckler animals, your dairy beef animals, and your dairy animals. We used the November 2021 evaluation. So we used that because it was before the animals were slaughtered and none of the carcass data was included yet in the evaluation. So once the carcass data comes in, that can then change an animal's evaluation figures after. So the animals that had, you know, very high carcass performance, their carcass or terminal traits, or, you know, their CBV value would have been increased by that. We wanted to see before the animals were slaughtered, was the CBV based on the genetic merit and what we knew about the animals before slaughter? Was it going to predict the higher performing animals? So the important questions, I suppose, before looking at the data are: one, what is the distribution of the CBV? So in terms of, what are the lowest values and what are the highest values? How well does it predict future performance? So like, was the CBV before these animals were slaughtered, was it identifying the animals that ultimately ended up with higher value carcasses and better performance? And does it work across all the animal types, so suckler, dairy beef, dairy animals, etc.? So firstly, if we were to look at the distribution, so this was the commercial beef values right across the 40,000 steers. And look, as you would have expected, so our animals are color coded. So the blue lines are our dairy animals, the orange lines are dairy beef, and the gray lines are the suckler beef animals. So as you'd imagine, the dairy animals are making up most of the lowest values down here at the left. Some of them are actually have negative CBV values. You then have your dairy beef animals here in orange, sort of in around the center, so hovering. Some are negative and some are positive. And then you have your suckler animals here up the top, which, as you'd expect, because those animals are bred specifically for beef, and they're, they have much higher carcass values and carcass traits, which is giving them those higher CBV values. And I suppose it's important to remember the CBV is being talked about a lot in terms of the importance to farmers involved in, in dairy beef systems, but it's going to be a very useful tool as well for suckler farmers, selling weanlings or selling stores, but also those farmers in systems where they're buying, very good quality suckler type animals, buying them as weanlings or buying them as stores and taking them through the slaughter themselves. The CBV will be a useful tool for those farmers as well. So our higher CBV animals generating higher value carcasses. So this is a cohort of animals that we looked at. These are suckler animals. They were all slaughtered at between 30 and 31 months. We divided them up based on their CBV. Look, we applied a star rating. So 1 star being the bottom 20%, 5 stars being top 20%. As you can see, there's quite a big difference there in the commercial beef value from the highest to the lowest. So the highest animals were up at 240 euros CBV, back to the lowest animals at just under 40 euros. Their carcass weight figure, now this isn't the carcass weight that they killed out at, this is their carcass weight figure in their Eurostar index, so their carcass weight PTA. The highest value animals were up at 24.5, back to the lowest animals at just under 4. And you can see there's a pretty dramatic difference there in the carcass weights as well. So you have over 70 kilos difference there in the carcass weights. And I suppose, just for argument's sake, I know it's a lot higher at the moment, but if you were just to put a flat €4 a kilo carcass value on that, that's already 280 euros. But look, at today's price, it's probably going to be up around 350 euros or maybe more. In spec and conformation, look, the vast majority of suckler animals are going to be in spec, but you do see a slight drop off with the 1 star animals. The fat is going to be more or less the same. And obviously, because the 5 star animals are going to be grading that little bit higher as well, they're achieving a higher price per kilo. And ultimately, look, there's a very, very significant difference here in the final revenue being generated by the 5 star animals, 1950 back to, so there's about 300 and there's just over 350 euros difference there in the revenue created by the carcasses from the 5 star animals versus the 1 star. And remember, these are all being slaughtered at the same age as well. So it's working for the suckler. When we look at the dairy beef animals, not to dwell on this too long, but it's the same principle. 5 star versus 1 star. You can see there's 43 kilos difference in the carcass weight in terms of conformation, 95% coming into an R equals or better versus only 70% here on the 1 stars. And ultimately, when we look at the final value, 1600 versus 1393, so over 200 euros difference there between the 5 stars and the 1s and the dairy beef. And when we look at the dairy cross dairy animals, so these are your Frisian males, Again, broke them up into 5-star versus 1-star. And when we go to the final value there, €1,400 versus 1284, so about €120 difference there between the highest and lowest value animals there. So across all of the systems, no matter what type of animal a dry stock farmer is looking to purchase to take through the slaughter, CBV is working, and it is going to be a useful tool, and it is predicting, from an early age, before any performance data is feeding into the evaluations, it is predicting the animals that will perform better and will generate higher value carcasses at slaughter. So this is the table of animals from the video at the start, animals 1 to 4. So when we look at the CBV values here, we've quite a big range. So we've the highest value animal here up at €81, down to the lowest value animal at €3. And this is their performance. So they were slaughtered at between 22 and 24 months. And if we were to just focus on the first 2 animals, for example, because they're the animals that have the biggest difference between their CBVs, €78 between them. This animal 1, the dam is actually a Jersey cross, so that would actually put him at a disadvantage starting off, because he's coming from a dam that would have a very low genetic merit for carcass. But the sire must be a very high carcass value sire that's bringing him up then as well. So he's a CBV of 81, age of slaughter 22 months, carcass weight 349, and R plus 3 equals with a 53% kill out. Versus our animal here 2. So the dam is a Frisian, the sire is a Jersey, so that's obviously going to pull the carcass merit well back. The CBV is only €3, so quite a low value. The animal was 2 months older at slaughter and was 50 kilos lighter in terms of carcass weight. So again, if we were to put our flat €4 of a kilo value on that, you're looking at €200, but at today's price, you could say it's probably coming in at maybe €250 difference. Add to that, the animal 1 is being slaughtered 2 months earlier, so quite a significant saving there in terms of cost for farmers. But of course, we have to put it in environmental terms nowadays as well. That's a lot less feed the animal is consuming, which means that animal is leaving a much lower carbon footprint as well over its lifetime, because it's consuming less feed, but also it's going to be producing less methane over its lifetime as well, because it's slaughtered 2 months younger. 2 full grades in the difference, and obviously on the QPS system, that's going to lead to a significant difference in terms of the price paid per kilo. Fat score is more or less the same, and with a better kill out as well. And again, these animals were only slaughtered in the last 2 weeks, so the carcass data hasn't been feeding into their evaluations yet. So this is essentially what the farmer would have had when he would have been buying these animals, if there was a CBV available. So it is proving to be, based on the analysis that we've done, that we're continuing to do, it is proving to be a very valuable tool and very strong at predicting the animals with the highest genetic potential. So just in summary, the CBV, look, it has the potential to be a vital tool for dry stock farmers going forward. And I think, look, it's important that farmers try and use it. And, like anything like this to catch on, I think it would be important this spring for farmers, particularly where calves are being sold from farm to farm. And, in the past, animals were maybe being judged on how they look in terms of their health status, or is there a good shine from the calves? Do they look like they're thriving? And also on breed type. But I would ask farmers that are buying calves this spring, that if they're sourcing them directly from dairy farmers, to ask those dairy farmers to provide them with the CBV details, because it will give them very good information as regards the genetic merit of those animals, and it will also probably have an impact on what they're prepared to pay for those animals as well. So as the analysis shown, those high CBV animals, they are exhibiting higher performance and higher value carcasses. It's working across all the breed types. So whether it be suckler or your from your suckler animals, your Charolais cross limousines or your blues, whatever the case may be, right down to your full dairy animals, your dairy bull calves. It's working, and it's highlighting the higher performing, the higher genetic merit animals across all of the systems. it's definitely going to increase the onus on dairy farmers to use better quality beef sires, particularly as regards the dairy beef calves. There has been in the dairy side a push, particularly since the abolition of quotas in 2015. And there's been, you know, some herds have seen a lot of expansion. That has put maybe pressure on labor, more cows calving in a more condensed period of time. Farmers have less time to be, I suppose, dedicating time to calving cows. And what that's done is it's pushed dairy farmers to seek much easier calving, much shorter gestation bulls, which is fine from a calving point of view. But what tends to happen then is the beef traits also tend to go in the wrong direction as well, as you push easy calving and short gestation to the extremes. And what's happening then is beef farmers are being left to kind of pick up the pieces in a sense, because they're buying calves that, you know, are probably genetically much poorer than calves 15 or 20 years ago of the same breed type, because of the focus that dairy farmers have had on really pushing calving and gestation to the extremes. But look, accurate parentage recording is going to be critical as well. And that is one thing I would say to farmers purchasing calves as well, is that, you know, the CBV is really only as good as the parentage that's put on the animal. And in particular, the sire recording with the dairy beef calves. So it's just something to be mindful of as well, and particularly where you're sourcing calves directly from farmers, just, you know, to have that conversation with them and make sure that they are recording the sire details correctly. So look, that's the end of the presentation. So I'll hand you back to Nicky. If there's any questions there, I'd be more than happy to take them, or I'm sure there'll be maybe questions at the end as well.
Yeah, thanks a million, Chris. So I suppose I won't get an opportunity to ask too many questions, because we've a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A function. And I suppose just to kind of maybe summarize some of them, a lot of them are in relation to when will these figures be available on a calf. So at what age will a CBV figure be available on a calf? How can farmers look it up? Can they put in a tag number on a search if they're not on Herd Plus and search that animal? Will it be on marked boards soon? And can a report be generated on the Herd Plus app to you know, walk through a shed of calves with the page in front of you and to screen them based on their CBV?
Yeah, so I'll go through those questions from the start. So the first one was, when will the CBV be available on a calf? As soon as the calf is registered and the details come into ICBF, provided, like, look, the dam is compulsory, but provided the sire is provided as well, or recorded, the CBV is generated as soon as the calf hits the ICBF database. The same as an EBI for a dairy heifer, or a Eurostar index for a beef animal. So it's there instantly. Obviously, then if an animal is genotyped and as information is recorded on it, the reliability in the CBV will increase then over time. Is there a search facility? Not at the moment. So I suppose if you have a farmer looking to buy maybe suckler heifers, they can put the tag numbers into the animal search. We don't have it available for the CBV calves, but I mean, that's not to say we can't build some functionality that farmers could do that. What I would say is, where farmers are buying calves directly from source dairy herds, they, you know, the majority of dairy farmers are in Herd Plus, and those farmers can provide the CBV information to the buyer. So I would strongly urge the farmers that are buying the calves to, you know, maybe it sounds a bit strong, but to demand the information from the dairy farmer. You know, the farmer, they can get it on their phone. They can log into their Herd Plus account and print the information off, or look, if it came to it, ICBF could post some information out to the farmer or give it to them over the phone, you know. But, you know, the demand needs to be there from the purchasers, from the dairy beef farmers to really get this to take off, you know.
Yeah, no, thanks a million, Chris, and we might get back to you with a few more towards the end. So I suppose moving on onto a relatively new topic, but very, very relevant to dairy beef systems. And we probably see more of these issues in dairy beef systems because we see calves bought in onto farm. I see a lot more transitioning from different diets, different milk feeding systems, and the challenge that a lot of producers face is bloat. And we also have summer scour syndrome also becoming an issue on many farms. And tonight, speaking on this topic, we've Michelle McGrath. Michelle is a member of the Calf Care Technical Working Group with Animal Health Ireland, and prior to taking up her role in Animal Health Ireland, she worked as a mixed practice vet for over 12 years, and she's also involved in the breeding of Holstein Friesian animals. So Michelle is really well versed in terms of the challenges that is faced by calves on farms across Ireland. And, you know, she has lots of real practical solutions, you know, certainly in regard to bloat and to reduced incidence of summer scour syndrome. So I'll hand you over to Michelle for the next talk.
Thanks, Nicky. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Thanks very much for having me here tonight. As Nicky said, my name is Michelle, and I've been working with Animal Health Ireland for the last 2 years. I have a bit of a head cold, so hopefully you can all hear me okay. So I'm going to talk about 2 topics tonight. The first one is bloat in young calves. And so basically, when a calf is born, their abomasum makes up 70% of their stomach, and the rumen takes a while to develop. It develops gradually as they begin to eat, ration, and drink water. So there are 2 types of bloat, and there's depending on the age of the calf and if it occurs in the abomasum or the rumen. So tonight we're going to talk about abomasal bloat, which occurs basically in the abomasum from 4 to 21 days. So it's a very young calf problem. So the onset of it is complex and likely to be caused by a combination of both management and nutritional factors. So basically, it's a buildup of excessive gas in the abomasum, which can't escape, and this can either be caused by when the carbohydrates from milk or milk replacer are being broken down, or also it can be caused from gas-producing bacteria, which are naturally present in the abomasum. These are fine in small quantities, but it's when they multiply rapidly, they can cause problems. And then both these can be compounded by anything that delays abomasal emptying, which is just how quickly the food leaves, the semi-digested food leaves the abomasum into the small intestine to be digested. So there's a lot of big words there, but basically it's caused by a combination of factors. So I'll go through how you can reduce the risk of bloat on your farm. So firstly, it's back to good hygiene, and this is in the equipment that you use when you're feeding the calves, the buckets or the whisks or whatever you're mixing up the milk replacer with. And then also with anyone who has calf feeders, they need to, some of them think that because they're an automatic calf feeder that they don't have to do anything, but really you need to be washing the teats a couple of times a week and looking at them closely to see if there are any cracks, because this is where the bacteria will build up and can cause problems. So they should be changed regularly and cleaned in peracetic acid a couple of times a week. So then another risk is group size. Basically, the bigger the group, the more stress on the animal, and the stress normally leads to disease. So the ideal group size for calves is about 12 to 15. But again, with calf feeders, to make it worthwhile, there's usually larger amounts of calves in the pen. So one way to deal with this is just to make sure the calves are like the similar age, similar size, and not to be mixing groups, have them the same group as they go up along. So when it comes to mixing your milk replacer, consistency is key. You need to have the same protocol every time you're feeding the calves. Have the same temperature, have the same feeding time, and have the same milk volume. calves don't like change. So just keep this in mind when you are feeding, and try and do it at the same time every day, and be wary of the temperature that you're feeding it at. Some of the milk replacers need to allow the powder dissolve properly. They might need temperatures of 50 degrees Celsius, but this would be a bit too high if you're feeding it to the calf. So just be aware of this when you are feeding. Then it's back to abomasal emptying, which is affected by a few things. Basically, it's how quickly the food leaves the abomasum, and this in a normal situation it wants to be leaving at a regular, consistent rate, but this can be affected by a few things, like the volume of milk in the abomasum, the concentration of milk solids or milk replacer, and the temperature of the milk as well. And it's also compounded then by if the calf is sick, or if it doesn't have access to proper water, clean water, or if it's not drinking the water. All these things will affect the rate of emptying. Basically, the longer the food is in the abomasum, the more gas that's produced, and is increasing the risk of bloat to occur. And then finally, we have to have a good quality calf ration available, because some different carbohydrates are digested at different rates. So proper calf ration will have these factors accounted for, so they will be digested at the optimal rate. So just there are some things that you can do to help reduce the risk of bloat. Basically, it's a big problem on a small number of farms, and if you're not experiencing it, don't worry about it. But if you are, then look at these risk factors and discuss it with your vet and put a protocol in place to deal with it, because if the problem is there, the calves die quite quickly. So time is very important. So then moving on to summer scour syndrome. This is a relatively new condition where there's little research available at the moment, but it is being carried out. And at Animal Health Ireland, we have just developed a new leaflet addressing this syndrome based on the research that is there to date, and experience from clinical cases from various experts in the area, for example, at UCD. So the clinical signs, they are scour, rapid weight loss, which can also occur with many other diseases like coccidiosis or salmonella, or just worms or trace element problems. You also get weakness and ulceration. So basically, the summer scour syndrome can only be diagnosed once you have ruled out any other of these common diseases that I've mentioned. What it does seem to be common between in all the cases that we've seen so far is that it seems to be precipitated by calves that are being grazed on very lush pastures, which is really which is common now in Ireland, because everyone are very good at growing good grass. But so basically, why this we think is a problem is that the calf's rumen hasn't developed enough. As I said, when it has to go through quite a process from birth where it's not developed at all to like at 10 or 12 weeks then being properly developed to be able to digest a lot of lush grass. So when the rumen is in the beginning, there are no papillae in the inside surface of the rumen, and these papillae are essential for the environment for digesting grass and all feed. So they need time to grow, and they're encouraged to grow by the weaning process and how a calf is reared before it goes out to grass. So if these papillae inside the rumen haven't developed, then you get a buildup of ammonia and an unstable pH, and which leads to scour. So how we can prevent it, as review the rearing, calf rearing process and wean gradually. So like you need to wean the calf at between or around 10 weeks. Some places where it's been a problem, depending on the farm, it's recommended that you wean the calves completely inside and keep them inside for 2 more weeks and then leave them out. But that's just on particular farms that have had the problem. It seems to be kind of farm specific at the moment. Another thing that's important is to ensure calves have high levels of fiber in the diet. And because calves like to the way they graze, they pick the nice bit of the grass, the leafy grass, and leave the stem. So one way to overcome this is to strip graze, and also to avoid grazing pastures where slurry or nitrogen have been spread recently, because this will increase the ammonia levels of the grass. So basically, if you suspect it, the sooner you deal with it, the better, because earlier intervention, you'll get a better result. So discuss it with your vet, do the various fecal analysis or grass analysis, and remove from the grass immediately. Basically, if you take them off the grass and put them on forage, and concentrate on ad lib access to water, they'll eventually come around. If you leave them on the grass, they won't, and they'll die. So it is important to act quickly and to remove them. And after about 6 weeks, if they've improved, you can leave them out again. So that's basically it for me. I think if, as I say, we've just developed a new leaflet, and it's available on the AHI website if anyone wants to look it up, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant fact sheet on the syndrome, Michelle, that you have on the website. Just if we look, I suppose one of the things you've mentioned is probably inadequate rumen development, and we know that that's probably as a direct result of poor solid feed intake or poor concentrate intake during the calf rearing phase. And if we look at farmers, we probably have a lot of farmers now looking at kind of accelerated growth programs for feeding their calves. So it's either coming through increased milk volume or increased concentration or milk powder fed per day. And it's probably displacing concentrate intake and getting calves to their target weaning weight at an earlier stage. You know, what would you advise in terms of dairy beef producers, in terms of calf rearing? How should they go about it to ensure adequate rumen development?
Well, again, we have leaflets on this as well on the website, but basically gradual weaning, like you really want to feed them more milk at the beginning, and then as they, like after 4 weeks, they can the level of milk can plateau out, because the calf can manage more food, it can manage feed as well. So if you're feeding too much milk all the time, it's never gonna get a chance to start eating the ration. Basically, you know, when it's ready to wean, if it's eating 1 kilo a day, that's a kind of a guideline that we go by. And it's hard, if like with groups, obviously, to know if they're all feeding 1 kilo a day. But as I was saying, one way, if you're worried, is to wean them totally inside and then keep them inside for 2 weeks off milk, and make sure that they're all eating, and it gives the rumen an extra chance to develop properly before they go out. Yeah, and then also have fiber. Like people would often have around a ring feeder with a round bale of straw or hay in the field as well. It's another source of fiber. But
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Just going back to the importance of hygiene, and in particular feeding equipment, and I suppose we see it with the individual feed units on automatic feed stations, where all calves are going to the one point and they're all coming in contact with similar challenge. What type of wash, you said remove the teat a couple of times a week? What type of product should we use to sterilize that and kill the important bacteria?
Yeah, well, I suppose you wash it first, and then you clean it with peracetic acid solution. So again, we have the concentration rate for that on the website, but it doesn't, you know, if it's too strong, it'll perish the teat. So it's important just to have the correct concentration.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I suppose it's a really simple practice,
Yeah.
but done routinely can save so much hassle.
Clostridia seem to be kind of one of the most prominent bacteria that cause it, the bloat. So sometimes people might suggest vaccinating the dam might help if you were having a problem with bloat, but that's kind of a bit anecdotal.
Would you typically see it been an individual calf problem, or could you see it been a problem across a group of calves in a given evening or something like?
Normally, when it's a problem, it's a big problem but not in a large number of herds. But it has become more of a problem in recent years, and it's probably down to a few factors, like the risk factors I mentioned with like there's probably larger group of calves now, labor is short, so hygiene might be an issue, and again there's more feeders, so they're probably not being cleaned as often, so all those factors together, you know, they make it worse.
Absolutely. And we probably have a lot of talk recently about slow release milk replacers, or slow to break down in the rumen, or farmers feeding it, you know, high concentrations on once a day feeding products. Do they have any impact on that room or the abomasal emptying? And can they lead to any increased challenges, or should farmers transition them again onto any of them, or how does it work?
Yeah, well, they do have a big impact because it affects the rate of abomasal emptying that I mentioned. And I was trying to keep away from this word of osmolality because it's when I hear it, I cringe. So I can imagine who people who aren't reading it every day. But basically, it's the level of the concentration of the milk solids in the abomasum, and this is higher in those once a day milk replacers. So that's why we only recommend feeding those really calves shouldn't be fed once a day until they're at least 4 weeks of age, because they're able to deal with it then. But up to that, it's a high risk and it will cause problems. So. No,
that's brilliant, Michelle, and we'll try and get back to you with some more towards the end of the panel. Okay, so moving on, we're moving on to Natasha Mernier. Natasha is working with Animal Health Ireland, and she is in charge of the beef health check and parasitic control programs with Animal Health Ireland. And previous to that, Michelle worked for years as a mixed practice vet. So she's a wealth of experience in the area and is a specialist in the area of animal population medicine. So I'll hand you over to Natasha, and she's going to discuss antimicrobial and anti-parasitic resistance on Irish farms.
So thanks very much, Nicky. So we're talking tonight about antimicrobial and antiparasitic resistance. It's maybe now a bit of a difference from what we've been discussing up till now. But the reason I want to mention it is just that there's some changes in the laws that are happening around veterinary medicine. And before I go into a little bit of detail as to what exactly is changing for those, I just want to explain why these rules are coming about and why things are changing. So firstly, what is antimicrobial resistance? I'm sure you've heard quite a lot about this. It's essentially what it means. Resistance is when medicines are no longer effective at killing their target. And what that target is differs according to the type of medicine. So antimicrobials tend to be against any kind of microbes, but usually when we refer to it, we're referring it to antibiotic resistance. And that's medicines that target bacteria. Specifically bacteria, whereas there's other types of resistance. So, for example, anthelmintic resistance, and that's resistance for worms, to wormers, gut worms and stomach worms. There's quite a lot of resistance there as well. So those are the main two that tend to affect farms and the drugs that we're using on farms. And so that's just what I'll be mentioning this evening. But there are a number of reasons why there might be a higher risk of resistance developing on a farm. And basically, mostly what it comes down to is every time you use a product, there is a slight risk of resistance developing. So the more often you use these medicines, if you use them incorrectly, so if you don't, for example, finish a course of antibiotics, or you're not using it according to the way it should be used when it comes to wormers, and also underdosing. So this is a little bit more of a problem when it comes to the wormers, is are we dosing for the correct weight of the animals? And the way that the resistance comes about, it's actually something inherent. It's not something that we can put a stop to per se. All we can try and do is just slow down the development, because it's a survival of the fittest mechanism within these parasites and these bacteria. And the ones, if you treat the animals, the ones that survive are more likely to pass on their genes. And so their offspring then also have this resistance in them. And the only way we can really slow it down is to try and counter these risk factors. So that means using these medicines as little as possible, using them when we only when we need it, not just in case. And when it comes to hygiene practices and so on, hygiene practices is not using antibiotics instead of having good hygiene on farm, or if there's other alternatives such as vaccinations. So Peter, for example, discussed the vaccination that he uses on farm is trying to prevent the problems rather than just waiting till problems happen and then reaching for the antibiotics and then using it. So this is the shift in thinking that we're now needing because of resistance that's present. So why is resistance important in the first place? So if resistance is present at a high level, it essentially means that the medicines are no longer working effectively. So this is important for human and animal diseases, but where it's really becoming a problem is with what we call multi-drug resistance. So certain bacteria and even certain worms are resistant basically to all of the medicines that are available to treat it. And then what that essentially means is you might land up in hospital with a bacterial infection that has multiple drug resistance, and there's essentially no medicines that will work against that bacteria. And so that's something that's really critical from a human health point of view, and from an animal health point of view. For example, on the worm side, there are worms that are resistant to all of the available wormers. And then we have no drugs anymore that can work against to try and help with production and so on. So that's why those are important. And the other aspect then is that this resistance can spread. So when it comes to bacteria, there are a lot of bacteria that are shared between animals and humans, and the resistance can spread from animals to humans, or in the case of worms, for example, the resistance can spread between farms. The worms just travel in the animals onto another farm. And so our aim, why it's important, why we have to think about this is we have this responsibility to use antimicrobials as little as we possibly can, but as much as is necessary. They're good medicines. The reason we use them so much is because they're effective. And we want to keep it that way for as long as possible. And for that, we just need to acknowledge the tool that they are, and that they shouldn't just be used and dispensed as if they're vitamins. They should be used specifically when needed. So what exactly then is changing with the legislation? So at the EU level, and actually at the international level, there is definitely a shift in how we use antibiotics and how we use antiparasitics. And because of that, there's been a change in the EU legislation. And this came into effect now last month. And so already you might be seeing on the ground some differences when you're going to your vet and you're needing antibiotics. So I'll mention the antibiotics first. What are the changes that we're seeing there? Is firstly, we're moving away from treating healthy animals just in case. So there's this move away from blanket therapy, treating all the animals within a group. What we need to do now is to start treating animals based on a specific diagnosis, and ideally individual animals. If we want to treat a whole group, we as vets need to justify why we're treating the rest of the group if they haven't shown any clinical signs and we can't diagnose the disease. So what that means practically is that vets might now need to do a little bit more diagnostics to try and get to the root of the problem, to show that it is actually a bacterial infection and it's not something else. Antibiotics don't work against viruses, so there's no point in giving an antibiotic if it's a viral infection, for example. And so the vet might need to really to get a diagnosis to justify giving those antibiotics. Only small quantities of antimicrobials will essentially be allowed on farms. So there's no longer a case where vets can just give you a bottle just in case if you need it in the future. Here's a bottle of some antibiotic. We can't really do that anymore. For this emergency treatment, we can only give you a small amount for something that you've maybe had a problem for before in the past. The other thing is when it comes to the type of antibiotics that are going to be prescribed, there's tighter controls on a very specific group of antibiotics that are really important for human health. They're called the highest priority critically important antibiotics. And there's quite a long list of them, but things, for example, like Exenil or Baytril or Draxxin. So you might be using those drugs for something, but they're no longer to be used as a first line of treatment. So what that means is that if there's another antibiotic that would work, the vet needs to prescribe that first before he gives this, and he kind of he or she needs to keep these antibiotics just in case for if there's a resistance present on farm. The reason these drugs are so protected, shall we say, is because they've been shown to be really important from a human health point of view. So they're specific antibiotics that might treat really serious diseases, or there might only be certain antibiotics that work for specific diseases in humans. And these diseases have also been shown that the bacteria can spread from animals to humans. And so we then, using them in animal medicine, really need to be very, need to keep these drugs as a last resort. And so what you might see is that the type of drugs that the vets are prescribing might change slightly, because these ones would then be kept in reserve. From a practical point of view, the antibiotic prescriptions, if the vet gives you one, you need to get that dispensed within 5 days. So that the drug, the prescription itself is only valid for 5 days. But if the vet, it doesn't influence how long you're giving the antibiotic for. If the vet feels that you should give the antibiotic for 21 days, you'll be able to buy enough medicine for the 21 days, but you have to get that prescription filled within 5 days. So you actually have to go buy the drug in 5 days. And the last major change that's coming from the antibiotic side of things, or in general, is that the Department of Agriculture is putting in a national veterinary prescription system. And what that essentially means is that the paper prescriptions that we would normally be getting are now going to be switching over the next few months to an online system. And you'll be able to have a text message that you can then take to a pharmacy or a co-op or wherever you're buying the medicines. You'd get a text to be able to get that medicine dispensed to you. The other change that's coming with this is that there might be more details that are needed for your animals. So if there's less than 5 animals that require an antibiotic, you're actually, the vet has to fill in the animal tag number, the animal ID in the system. So just be prepared for that, that if you have just a few animals, just have the tag number handy so that it's available for the vet just to fill that in. But this is not in all veterinary practices yet. This change with this online system is going to come over a number of months, but eventually I understand that it will be rolled out throughout Ireland. So what are the changes then for antiparasitics? Essentially, this is a major change, is that where prescriptions weren't required before, and when I'm talking about antiparasitics, I'm talking about the anthelmintics, so all the wormers, anything for lice, flies, the external parasites, so anything that's for parasites, all of those drugs from the 1st of June this year will require a veterinary prescription. you'll be able to then take that prescription to any current supply that you have, your co-op, your licensed merchants. They'll be able to dispense those products for you. You don't have to buy them from your vet. Anywhere where you currently get it, you can still buy it, but you just will need the vet prescription. The prescription itself, unlike for antibiotics, for the parasite medications, they'll be valid for 12 months. So you have a 12-month period over which you can actually go to the co-op or the vet and buy the product. And you can buy the product in parts. So you don't have to buy everything that's been prescribed for you. You don't have to buy it all in one go. You can actually buy just one or two things and then go back later and get more. The product itself, the vet, you'll be able to swap a specific product for another one that is similar. So you don't have to necessarily buy the one that the vet is prescribing as well, but you'll be able to switch them out. So with that, that's all I have to share, and maybe we can then just take any questions on that. So yeah, thanks, Nicky.
Thanks very much, Natasha. I suppose a lot of changes in the area, so it's really good to get that update. I might just ask the rest of the panelists to maybe come back on stream, and we can kick off some questions to the entire group. But I suppose just to continue on with Natasha, a lot of farmers are probably going to face respiratory challenge, in their calf sheds over the next couple of weeks. And in terms of sustainable use of these products, in the past, maybe a lot of farmers went for the stronger type product, or were probably using antibiotics for, viruses and things that they were ineffective against. So what are the alternatives to antibiotic use in terms of getting early intervention on respiratory challenge in a calf shed, and how do farmers identify, what is needed and when?
Sure. So respiratory disease is actually a tricky one because it's quite complex. There's multiple factors that go into it. And as you mentioned, it's not just bacteria. It might be viruses. It might be all of them at the same time. And so what you want to do is to try and get everything in your favor. So Peter had showed us his shed there earlier. Nice thick bedding. Everything's warm. The calves are happy. The hygiene is good. So you're already setting the calves up that their immunity is good going into the respiratory season. Using vaccination to prevent some of the diseases, and then just to be clear, like if the animals need an antibiotic, then by all means, make sure that you get in early, that you get a good diagnosis, and the vet can prescribe that for you, so that you catch it sooner rather than leaving it too late when it then spreads to all of the calves within the shed. If any of the animals are sick, always just remember just to remove those from the group and separate them out, so that you can prevent spread within a group as well if needed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just in terms of, on the parasite challenge, and in terms of coming up with that, deciding on the product with your vet, will that be based on any diagnostics? Will there be egg counts and looking at the types of worms present and any possible resistance, or how are vets going to be best placed to make that decision on the prescribed product?
So parasite control is also one of those very tricky things. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of things to consider, and it changes every year with the weather and every season. And so there's a number of tools that the vets have available that they might do. So, for example, fecal air counts. You might look at the pastures themselves and how the animals are grazed. There's certain, if you've been using a pasture, for example, for calves last season, it's very likely that that's a high-risk pasture for calves again this season. And so it's looking at this combination of things and trying to work through all of these things to get the best plan going forward, but also to see what was useful last year. If you think that there, for whatever reason, a product is not very effective or didn't seem to be working, then there are drench tests that are available, or what we call a fecal air count reduction test that can try and measure and see whether the drench is still working effectively.
Okay, and just another question coming in on that, if for early intervention, is there going to be any rapid testing for, any kind of rapid tests that can be carried out either by a vet or by farmers just to try and identify and target the treatment better?
Would that be on the worm front?
Or on just in general challenges, probably respiratory? Is there any nasal swabs, anything like that?
It's difficult because it's for each disease, it's quite specific, and so your vet is always the best placed person to give you the advice, and it kind of depends what the problem is. So
no, there's loads of questions coming down, probably jumping back in order, trying to get everything covered. So maybe we just bounce back to Michelle. There's a good lot of questions have come in since your talk, and I suppose one of them, and it's probably the one that a lot of people revert back to, whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, but calves that get hit with summer scour syndrome or suspected, should they be returned to a milk replacer diet during the summer?
Yeah, well, as I was saying, it's still a new enough disease. So what we recommend is to take them off the grass is the first thing you have to do, and fiber and concentrate is very important, and plenty access to water. Having said that, depending on how bad the calf is, and from personal experience, which is not an AHI line, I know calves will sometimes only drink milk, and it might be the only means of nutrition they will get. So if they're very bad and they won't eat, then I think if you start them off on milk gradually and give them a chance to adapt to it, it may be an option. But firstly, take them off the grass and have access to fiber would be the first things to do.
Yeah, and just another farmer has a question in, is there similarities between CCN and summer scour syndrome, or is there any link there or anything?
Not that I'm aware of. CCN is more neurological, and they tend to go blind from it, whereas summer scour, unless I haven't seen them go blind from that to date anyway, so I wouldn't think there is, no.
And just another one that's in there, is there an optimum age, or I suppose maybe it should be worded, is there an optimum window of age in order to prevent the occurrence of this syndrome?
Yeah, well, it goes back to, the entire life of the calf. Really, it's all about building up to weaning and getting that rumen ready. So once you have all, once you're doing that proper, then that's helping a lot. But I guess it does seem to be farm specific. And so the critical period is to monitor the calves really carefully after they're left out for the first 4 to 6 weeks. But it can happen in calves up to a year, it's been seen. So quite wide, sorry.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And Peter, there's just a question in there. Have you had any occurrence of either bloat or summer scour syndrome? And just, if not, what do you attribute it to, or how do you control it and monitor?
Not really much bloat. Probably putting that down to, I suppose, the correct feeding rate with the automatic feeder. It's always the correct rate. Coccidiosis, or sorry, summer scour. Yes, not really sure if it wasn't, but have had a few calves with those symptoms. I did put them back on milk, plenty of forage. They did come right in the end.
Okay, good stuff. And Chris, I know we had an awful lot of questions for Chris on the new CBV index, and we were working through quite a few of those. I suppose it's always coming back to money with everything, and farmers are wondering, is a calf with a CBV of €83 worth €83 more than his cum rate at 0?
Yeah, so the CBV, unlike the so if you take EBI and the Eurostar indexes, what they represent is half of an animal's genetic merit, because of course that's a breeding index, so you can only we don't know what an animal will be mated to, whereas the CBV is what we call a direct economic breeding value, so it's the animal's direct genetic merit. So it's essentially 1 for 1. So yeah, if an animal, let's say, has a CBV of €100 and another animal has a CBV of 0, then between the 5 traits, now it's not all going to be, and this is important, it's not all, it doesn't automatically mean that the carcass weight at the end will be €100 more. It could be more, it could be less, because you have docility in there as well, which has an economic value. And you have feed intake, which is often something that's not really seen by the farmer. But yes, all else being equal, the CBV is estimating that there's €100 difference in the genetic merit across the 5 traits in the CBV between the 2 animals.
Okay. And just, you mentioned feed intake, and there's a question on feed intake. I suppose, what is the economic weighting, and what is the difference, say, in the figures that you're seeing for feed intake on the index for purebred dairy animals versus beef cross animals, and how was that relative to growth rate and to live weight of the animal?
Yeah, well, I suppose firstly, sometimes people get a bit confused between feed intake and feed efficiency. So feed intake is where you're just looking at intake in isolation, whereas feed efficiency is where you're combining what the animal is eating with what it's gaining. But you know, because we have a carcass weight trait in the index as well, we're able to then look at feed intake in isolation, because they're both feeding into the animal's overall index. In terms of, like, you know, you have to be kind of careful in the breed differentiation, because, you know, we sometimes get a bit caught up in breed stereotypes that, you know, whether, you know, Angus's are easier fleshing or whatever the case may be, but there's big differences within breed as well. Yeah, like on average, your dairy animals, that dairy influence will generally lead to a bit higher feed intake. You know, I suppose a dairy bull calf was bred first day with the intention in the hope that it would be a heifer calf and bred to be for dairy, and those dairy animals do have slightly higher feed intakes. But I mean, what's important is that within Tully, when you look at animals of the same breed type, there's up to 20% difference between the highest and the lowest of the same breeds. Like, you know, so that's what's important is to identify, you know, whether it's Peter's system and he's trying to buy Holstein Friesian bulls, or whether it's a suckler farmer looking for continental weanlings. It's to identify the best genetics within each breed and within each bloodline for feed intake. And
just there's another question. Just people are trying to see how it can work best for them. Is there any calculator like that you can put in a potential sire to use on a cow and get an expected progeny CBV figure prior to that calf even been concepted?
We don't have that currently, but so what I'll say is, so if it's a dairy farmer and he's trying to breed higher commercial beef value calves, look, when the dairy calves are just a byproduct of trying to breed heifers. So, you know, you're not really going to try and breed higher CBV Friesian calves, because, you know, your focus there is on the dairy traits. But as you know, when you're looking at your beef sires to use on the dairy cows, there's 2 things you can look at. So herds that are signed up to Herd Plus, they can actually look at the carcass merit for their dairy cows. So there's a profile in the Herd Plus service that shows the actual carcass weight value for each one of their dairy cows. And you might think that they're all pretty much the same, but there's actually huge variations, you know, even in a herd of, you know, 100 Holstein Friesian cows, from the best to the worst, there's big differences there. But also when they're selecting beef bulls, to use the dairy beef index, but within the dairy beef index, to use a bull that has as high a beef sub-index as possible. Because you could be using high DBI bulls, but if it's all coming from calving, like, that's not much good to Peter who's buying the calves, because he's not interested in easy calving, short gestation. He wants animals with good beef merit. So the dairy farmer needs to pick bulls with a high DBI, but with a high beef sub-index within the DBI to breed higher CBV calves. And on the suckler side, the higher the carcass traits, essentially the higher the CBV of the suckler animal will be.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I suppose on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up, and I'd just like to thank each of you for giving your time and your really detailed presentations and really useful tips that are going to make a difference to farmers in rearing calves this year and in the years going forward. So I'd like to thank you all for tuning in this evening as well. And if you have any further questions, you know, you can forward them on to ourselves, and we'll try and reply with some responses to the Q&A questions we didn't get to address. Okay, so thanks very much, everyone, and all the best.